Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And this is Pop Cult Podcast. Season 5 starts here.
We've been doing seasons?
Yeah, I've been keeping track of seasons.
Oh, wow.
So this is season 5.
Season 5.
Now, the first seasons aren't like full years, but I think it was around season 3. That's what is 2023. Season 4 is 2024. Season 5 is 2025.
Okay.
And we average, we do like about one episode a week, probably a little less than that. So we're probably maybe 45 episodes a year.
Ooh.
Was that, what did that noise mean?
A lot. I was just thinking about sitcoms.
Oh.
It'll be like 22 or something.
I'm going to say that we probably have a lot less production that goes into our podcast
That's
than
true.
your average television sitcom, We have a lighting guy. I don't know why we pay him because this is an audio-only podcast. But
some of us like to feel beautiful.
He does a hell of a job. So we are starting out this year. A little later, we're going to be reviewing Y2k. So we're going to go back a quarter of a century to the beginning of the new millennium.
Yeah.
But before we get to that, we're going to talk about Wicked Part 1. Misunderstood because of her green skin, a young woman named Elphaba forges an unlikely but profound friendship with Glinda, a student with unflinching desire for popularity. Following an encounter with the Wizard of Oz, their relationship soon reaches a crossroad as their lives begin to take very different paths. So this is the first half of the Broadway musical.
Okay.
That musical is something I'm not that big of a fan of. It came out in 2003 and was kind of like, it was like the Phantom of the Opera of its time, where it seemed to just be like the musical everyone who knew about Broadway loved and wanted to go see.
Yeah.
And the people involved were very talented. But my problem with it was I had read the novel that it was originally based on by Gregory Maguire, like Wicked, The Life and Times of the Wicked Witch of the West. And I really enjoyed that book when I read it in college because it was so dark and creepy and weird, which is how a book about the Wicked Witch of the West should be. It still made you empathize with her, but it also made Oz feel like this kind of darker than you might think it was from being a child.
Yeah.
Because you were seeing it from her perspective. I feel that the musical, and especially this movie, soften all of the edges that the book had, which was one of the reasons why I enjoyed the book so much. And so my kind of summary review of Wicked Part 1 is, I don't think it's like the worst movie I've ever seen, but I cannot imagine sitting down ever again in my life for another almost 3 hours and watching this part 1 of a movie again.
Yeah, this is a film that definitely, if somebody were to come forth and tell me this is their favorite film, I would not judge them. I would say, hey, visually, I get it. All, the production design, I get it. Like, the clothing, immaculate. It's just not something I want to revisit.
If someone told me this was their favorite film, I'd go, I get it. You're autistic and this is your fixation, right? So that's why it would be your favorite film.
I don't feel like you should just blame autism immediately.
Well, no, because for a movie that came out in last month to be someone's favorite film, but if it's based on a previously established property, then in my head I would go like, oh, so your fixation is either this music specifically or the Wizard of Oz in general.
Yeah.
And that's just your autistic fixation, so that's cool.
And it's probably
but if you're not autistic,
the light-hearted version of Wizard of Oz. They probably don't like the second film,
Return to Oz,
which is probably
incredible.
That it was a little bit too dark and dingy and didn't represent all the whimsy of the wizard, the Wizard of Oz. But when you think about it on a deeper level, as someone who is living in Oz, to find out that the person that is running everything
is a big phony,
and not only that, it just wants to get more power upon themselves, you would probably have a different view of Oz instead of being an outsider and just in awe of the Technicolor.
So the Wizard of Oz is such an interesting thing to me because it is the first big American piece of folklore.
Yeah.
We have smaller stories, Johnny Appleseed, Paul Bunyan, but those are just centered on like a person. And if I ask you, can you tell me the story of Pecos Bill? You're gonna go, I think he lassoed a tornado at one point, and that might be about the extent
Hmm.
of it. John Henry, I know there's kind of one story. It's he raced against a machine that could lay rail, and he beat it but died.
Yeah.
It's not an expansive thing you can go anywhere with.
Hmm.
The Wizard of Oz is a fairy tale world that is, in many ways, a mirror to the United States. So L. Frank Baum was a pretty progressive guy for his era. I can't speak to all of his beliefs on everything. I do know he was very into women's suffrage because his wife was the daughter of someone very prominent in the movement. I want to look this up real quick. Uh, Maud Gage was his wife, and her mother was where are her parents?
Parents don't exist.
She was born out of the ether. Um, Matilda Joslyn Gage. Yeah, okay. So she was a contributor to women's suffrage, also campaigned for Native American rights, abolitionism. I think that's going to be, oh yeah, anti-slavery and free thought, which means not be having to keep to any sort of established religion.
Yeah.
So for that time period, for this time period, they would be fucking radicals in the United States.
Yeah.
And so Baum, I think originally Oz was like a story he would tell his kids, like that's how he made it up, kind of like The Hobbit. But then whenever he sat down to formally kind of structure it out and write it, he turned it into a satire about aspects of the United States monetary policy, I want to say,
Hmm.
because we have the yellow brick road, which is gold, and then in the book it's the silver slippers.
Yeah.
And I think it was about the gold standard versus the silver standard. I don't know all the economic details, but I know that was a part of it. And then he wrote the one book, and that was it. And that came out in 1904, I think. Or no, that's the Marvelous Land of Oz. I think it was like in the late 1800s, like 1890 something. And then there was a musical that was made based on that book, and that musical was massively popular.
Yes.
And I guess they were doing like a kind of a traveling tour kind of thing. And Baum was so inspired by the popularity of the musical that he wrote a follow-up book, which I think that's The Marvelous Land of Oz. Dorothy's not in it at all. I think it's a kid named Pip
Okay.
or something like that. He's like a little boy, and he's essentially an orphan child who is owned by Mombi the witch.
Okay.
And then he takes a potion that gives life to things. He creates Jack Pumpkinhead, the Sawhorse. You get introduced to all these other characters. And so from there, the Oz series went on and on. I think there's 40 books total.
Hmm.
He did not write all of them. There came a point where before he died, he chose a woman as his successor to keep writing the series.
Okay.
And so she wrote a bunch more. I think there's some Oz fans that love her books. There's some Oz fans that kind of ignore them and think that Bombs are the only official ones. It's kind of a Frank Herbert Dune situation where his son took over and just kept adding lore to the universe that a lot of fans are like,
Yeah,
no,
but
thank you.
did the dad give the blessing? That's the
Uh,
question.
he created him. That's more than Baum did with this lady.
Well, he picked a
True.
successor, so.
And so we've had Oz in all kinds of variations. And of course, the most popular version of Oz is the 1939 MGM musical,
Yes.
which dominates the aesthetics of how Oz is presented. However, that creates some legal challenges because, in the instance of Return to Oz, which was owned by Disney, they could not make it look like the 39 movie. So they went back to the original illustrations from the book and kind of modeled the look of the movie after that.
Yeah.
Wicked is kind of riding this narrow copyright line
Yeah.
where I think they've kind of taken enough elements from what people are familiar with when it comes to Oz, but things like, the Munchkins, I don't know if in the original books the Munchkins were little people.
I don't you think they weren't.
I think they were just normal because there's like four people: the Munchkins, the Quadlings, the Gillikins, and the Winkies.
Hmm.
And so that's like it's the four cardinal directions. And so there's a witch for each of those regions. Uh, and so like in Wicked, The Munchkins are full-size people. I think it was the 39 movie is the thing that made Munchkin synonymous with like little person.
Yeah.
And that's why Dunkin' Donuts now has Munchkins, so you can get little tiny donut holes.
Okay.
Um, so of course we've mentioned the 1939 Oz, which you did not see until you were in your mid-20s. I showed it to you.
Yeah, that's true.
That's an important film to understand any film version of Oz. What generally were your thoughts on watching the original film?
I can understand how it became what you could call like a sleeper hit. How at the beginning it did not make as much money as it originally did until it started replaying again and again.
Once it became like a television staple, I think
Yeah.
for me, I remember it airing a lot at Easter, and that was where that was the time of year I would always watch it.
Yeah, and so it's one of those wholesome movies with really good singing because you think about the fact that
Judy Garland.
Judy Garland's in there and giving like the Queen of Pouts look and she was like what 16 at the
He was a
time,
child, yeah.
who was being made to take diet pills because they wanted to make her look 14 but still have
Yeah,
boobs.
her whole story is like very sad.
Yeah, and so it's one where it's also sort of like when you think about it, like it's like, oh, what whimsy and wonder when the original Tin Man apparently got sick because of the
The silver paint they used, he had an allergic reaction to, that actor.
yes,
So
and then
he went
like
into anaphylactic shock.
and like they use asbestos as was one point for like
I think there was asbestos used on set. Yeah, it was, and I think like the actors were not treated very well, which doesn't surprise me because
then
people
later
with disabilities are always not
then
treated
later
well.
only to be accused of being drunks and out of orderly in another
I
film.
wouldn't be surprised if they were drunk and out of order, but that was kind of a symptom of being disabled in a society that doesn't really acknowledge you
Or just
exist as
also
a
just
person.
been given alcohol to be told to shut up and
Yeah,
perform.
that too. Yeah.
It's interesting for me because I don't have any nostalgia towards The Wizard of Oz. Um, I can understand when you think about it like as an American standpoint, this movie is the most American thing ever.
The original Wizard of Oz?
Just like the whole like when you think about like the way trajectory and where it went through from books to theater to movies, from movies again back to theater.
There was a Super Nintendo Wizard of Oz
Yeah,
video game.
the thing is like it will not die because it's one of those things that
It was public domain.
it's part of public domain, but it's also like it's because people kind of avoid the darker elements of it. And if they do go to the darker elements of it, it's never like the highly focused stuff. They just remain on this like
Well, nobody really goes past the first book.
yes.
Like Return to Oz was that rare occasion where it was like, wow, we actually get like Ozma and we get these other characters. You go to something like Oz the Great and Powerful, the Sam Raimi film, and it's instead of getting more from Oz, it's just kind of a retread of a lot of things from the movie done through the lens of a prequel.
Yeah, and then you also think about like there has been multiple series that people have done like on television. Like Zoe Deschanel had her version.
Oh,
of
they tried to do like
Oz
modern
on
updates.
Sci-Fi. I think like Adria Arjona that was on Hitman, one of her first series, she was like
There was like an NBC Oz show
like
too, but I
who
don't
was
remember.
I think it was like directed or like the showrunner was the director of The Fall.
Oh,
So like
the Zoe Deschanel one was called the Tin Man.
yes.
And so he was like a bounty hunter or something. It was
Like,
something silly.
like he just like like it was a military man.
And then you had there was the NBC show which came around the time of like Heroes and Lost.
Yeah.
They thought they were gonna have like this, extended mystery kind of thing. Completely flopped in the first season. What I find interesting, my favorite Oz thing that I've discovered recently was there's a system agnostic tabletop supplement you can get that's Oz, but it's designed to be like an urban point crawl.
Yeah.
So it's Oz has become a massive city that's spilled out into the 4 counties around it. And it has like a whole rail system and like businesses at important locations. It has a whole index of all the characters in the series. And part of that game is you get to pick, they call them the wardens or the witches of each of the four corners.
Yeah.
And so you, as part of the gameplay, get to decide who's the warden of each
Hmm.
uh, little county. But yeah, it's been explored in so many ways. Uh, the stage has been one of the ways it's been explored the most. So uh, now we get to this movie,
Okay, but
Wicked.
question before we see the
Yeah.
movie. Have you ever seen the musical?
The Wicked musical?
Yeah,
No.
me neither. And
I've seen enough of it and was able to read about it compared to the book that I was like, not for me.
so here's the thing. I thought that this whole thing, the first movie, was just the whole musical.
No, it's the first half of the musical.
And so
But they added a lot, and there's apparently songs that aren't in the musical that they've written for the movie. They kind of did a similar thing with Into the Woods, I think.
where they removed some songs and then added other
Yeah.
ones.
But I mean, the reason why they're doing Wicked in two parts is because Universal Pictures likes money. That's it. There's like no other reason. Because there's plenty of like one and done musicals.
Does Dorothy appear in the musical?
Apparently, I did read about that.
Okay.
She's off stage.
Okay.
So they talk about her. So like the events of the first story happen, but we see it. I think it's kind of similar in the book. We see it all from the point of view of what's the witch doing. So whenever she comes and finds her dead sister and confronts Dorothy, instead of seeing that, we see her after that happened.
Okay.
And there's dialogue, I guess, in the play to explain to the audience, like she's just returned from Munchkin County and her sister is dead.
Okay.
And they took the shoes.
Okay.
And I think she goes to the Wizard or Glinda or something and is like wanting them to do something about this.
Yeah.
So the musical, what were your general thoughts about it?
Okay. So I thought that Cynthia Evero did a great job.
Arivo, I think. That's how you say
Arivo.
it, yeah.
She was probably the one character that was convincing for me. But I think it's also because I'm kind of familiar of her playing serious characters. And so it was as if I was seeing her do a serious character splash with some Disney into it. That's how it felt like.
Mm-hmm.
Ariana Grande was was a little rough for me.
Well, we keep talking about Cynthia Erivo. I think she probably played the musical version of Elphaba quite well.
Yeah.
But I was disappointed because one of the appeals to me about the novel is that they don't hide the fact that the witch is a very vicious person.
That she has a temper. And
Well, like when she's a kid, she like bites people and scratches them severely. And so she gets a reputation for being wicked. But to me, I would read that as perhaps she's a neurodivergent child, right? She looks unlike anyone else around, and her behavior,
she doesn't look like anyone
they
else and
mistreat
isn't
her.
Receiving the love that she should be getting from her parents, she's lashing out.
And in the movie version, they basically turn her into this like bookworm who never does anything wrong. And that's one of the things throughout the movie is she's so perfect and never bad in any way, right?
Yeah.
Like she never does anything bad ever. That kind of annoyed me because it made her feel less human.
Yeah,
because
very Mary Sue.
Yes.
Something good in your life's going to appear because you've been so patient and loving, even though your dad tells you to stop jabbering.
Well, and it kind of makes Glinda a more interesting character.
Yeah.
Because if you think about Star Wars, let's say another big, massive franchise that everybody knows, Luke Skywalker is a much more boring character than Han Solo. And Han Solo is more interesting because he leaves. And you're like, is he going to come back or is he not? He's involved with criminal shit, right?
Yeah.
Like he's a shady guy. Luke Skywalker is never bad. In the original Star Wars trilogy, he never does anything bad. There's the whole, he might be driven to the dark side, but does he ever really do anything like that? No.
It's kind of like I've thought to myself years later, I was like, why is nobody really focused on Leia when that's such an interesting character?
And she's a more interesting character.
Like
than
she's part of a rebellion, and like to a sense, when you think about the film,
he has to kill.
she has to kill, but it's also sort of like she does not give up on the rebellion. She ends up ending her marriage because she's like, the rebellion is more important.
Yeah.
Um,
And so coming back to Wicked, I think the Glinda character, and this isn't performances necessarily, but I think the Glinda character and the position she ends up in is much more interesting to me than how Elphaba was portrayed in this version.
yeah.
Because she, like the opening number where she's telling the Munchkins that the witch is dead, and Grande plays it in a way that she isn't joining in the celebration. She's kind of putting on a fake smile because that's what her role is.
And like getting, everything ready for the effigy of like the wicked
Witch to
witch
be
being
burned.
burnt.
It's basically she's a propagandist
Yes.
for the wizard. And to me, it almost makes me want to go, wow, I'd love to see this story from the point of view of Glinda, like this version of Wicked.
Yeah, I think part of it is also having to do the fact that there is this lack of understanding that if we are going to have Alphaba be the main character, we have to also let her suffer with the possibility that maybe she does have awful thoughts. Maybe she has these urges to do something terrible, but is withholding, and that's when it's supposed to be like her magic or like scatters about. It's always about like no, she feels so much injustice, and
Yeah.
that's when the world like that's her magic reacts.
Well, it's
Like
they took the novel, which I liked, and they turned it into what is essentially like Hamilton.
yeah,
It's something for like liberals to just squee about. When it softens all the edges. When like in the book, she gets involved in like a terrorist group that operates in the underground of Emerald City. She plots and attempts the assassination of Madame Morrible, and then at the end of the book kills her.
yeah,
Um, and then I didn't know this until recently because I wanted to read a bit like where are we going on part two of this. And in the book, she has Lear, her son.
uh,
He's completely cut out of the musical. And for me, when we get to the parts of the book with Lear where she has this, son, that's a really important part because she's very cruel to him. But like the realization is that her cruelty comes out of a number of different factors that have happened to her.
yeah,
But see, one of the things that makes her be cruel to Lear, they also cut out of the movie or out of the musical. It's a death. I'm not going to say what it is if
okay,
somebody's listening and doesn't want to know
yeah,
who it is. Uh, yeah, they do some bullshit instead of killing that character to turn him into one of the characters from the original story.
yeah,
And then they do things like, uh, we'll talk about that in a minute. But yeah, so the witch becoming increasingly more nasty and mean is part of that original novel to me. So it was by calling her that, by treating her that way, by labeling her an enemy of the state, she starts to take on those negative traits because she becomes more and more isolated
yeah,
and feels more and more alone. So then it just becomes like she becomes like a stochastic terrorist. She's
yeah,
just a lone wolf. I mean, I guess she has her flying monkeys, but for the most part, she's a lone wolf committing acts of terrorism around Oz.
yeah.
Uh, and so to me, that's a much more interesting character than like who we fucking get in this. Like we were saying, it's very Mary Sue.
It's very Mary Sue, and it's also very confusing when it comes to the elements of the songs, right? So there is this part that it's supposed to be like the unlimited song, where Alphaba, and like Glinda are singing it to each other, like just being like unlimited together. We can be unlimited.
You gotta have unlimited power.
But the thing is, like, I never see them do anything that you'd be like, oh my God, they would like take over.
Well, think about this. How much magic happens at the magic school?
Barely anything. It's always Alphaba just being like, I'm so upset.
And then like things
something
float.
cracks.
Like things float or break.
Yeah.
But like they're we only really see one class.
Yes.
And they just don't seem to be doing much magic in that class.
And I don't know if it's just supposed to be that, magic is there, but it's dying out and only selected few people can control it. And
Well, for a 3-hour movie, I didn't get much information about those sorts of things. And when you have this much time and you're not using it to world build, what the fuck are you doing then?
which is very confusing because it's just sort of like It just feels like a movie that it felt like if you were just like adjacent to a Harry Potter fan
Yeah.
growing up, you would have enjoyed this, but then a Harry Potter fan would get kind of mad because there's no real magic going on, so fuck
Well,
this.
it's like there's really no magic until they get to Emerald City.
Yeah.
Uh, so Ariana Grande's performance as Glinda, I think she's fine. I think she's an actress who I've come to appreciate that she has very good comedic timing.
Yeah, I think it's just like she was just really tapping into like a Kristen Chenoweth or
Yeah, Kristen Chenoweth. Yeah.
Chenoweth's like imitation, which I think that was part of my problem. I wish she had used just her natural voice.
But then she has that kind of ability to be a song mimic, like a singer
Yes,
mimic, because we've seen it like on SNL. And I think she was kind of leaning into how did Kristen Chenoweth sing this?
yes.
Uh,
Versus just being like, then just give us the Broadway voice that you want to do.
because other like there are musicals where I can name like lots of songs in them.
Yeah.
And when I was thinking about Wicked, I can name two songs in this musical. Now, it's not a musical I've listened to a lot, but it was such a part of the culture that you think I would know
Like
more.
you couldn't escape it in like during
Yeah.
that time.
And I was like, because I know Defying Gravity and Popular. But then, like, and they are both in the first half of this movie.
Yes.
So my question would be, can anyone name a song from the second half that isn't a reprise that's good, that's memorable? Because I've
Yeah.
never heard anybody talk about it. I mean, because I feel like there's going to be a Defying Gravity reprise, right? There's going to be a Wicked reprise. Uh, and that brings me to we'll come back to the actors in a minute, but Stephen Schwartz, the composer, is one of the reasons why like I just it's not my thing. I don't think he's bad at all. I think he is a very talented songwriter. It's just the types of music he does. Like he wrote Godspell and Pippin, which were two early 70s musicals that are not my thing at all. And when you look at like more recently, uh, he's taking his music from the Prince of Egypt animated movie and turned it into a Broadway musical. Yeah.
Okay.
And now he's doing The Queen of Versailles, which is based on the documentary about the woman who had her husband build her that insane house in Florida.
Yeah.
And Kristen Chenoweth is in it as the main woman. So it seems like the two of them are probably friends or at least really good collaborators.
Yeah.
And he knows how to write for her,
Yeah.
which in turn means I want to say this. I don't think Kristen Chenoweth is a bad person. I just don't like her singing voice. Uh, and the only thing of his that I did like is Hunchback of Notre Dame. I think the songs in that fit the story and it works for me.
And I think he's also taking advantage that there is like now a huge nostalgia for
Disney.
no, I think like it's the Egyptian
Oh,
one
Prince of Egypt?
because that was not a Disney production.
No, it was a DreamWorks
It was a
animation.
DreamWorks one, and where like a lot of people now are going back being like that was underappreciated,
Well, the animation's very good.
that it's
Yeah.
very good, and the music was good, and it's just sort of like, all right, make your bank, buddy. I get it. Like,
Yeah, like it's one of those where I'm not like, oh, the guy shouldn't be allowed to write musicals. It's just, oh, if it's Steven Schwartz, I know it's probably not going to be my thing.
yeah,
I'm more of like a Stephen Sondheim guy. I like it heavier. I like it darker. Um, the other actors in this film, Michelle Yeoh as Madame Morrible. What did you think of her?
that was not good casting. She can't sing. I'm sorry,
Yeah.
she can't.
She
Like,
was kind of talking through her
she was
songs.
talking through it, and it was so hard because the thing is, like, she's super talented. She's an amazing martial artist. I'm sure if you got her into a dance scene, she would do great. She was great in everywhere and all things, blah, 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 like that one
Everything Everywhere All
all
at
at
Once.
once.
I would say that maybe in Mandarin she's a good singer, but the thing is, if you asked me to sing in Mandarin, now she's going to do a much better job singing in English than I would in Mandarin, but it would be hard,
But
right?
the
It's
thing is,
hard. They
great.
have coaches and things
If
like
they
that.
hired you, that means like there is coaches, there are people, and you could have hired a lesser known actress of her age that was probably is Asian and was on
And can
Broadway
sing,
and can sing because it was necessary. She was talking.
but she was cast because her name has some smoke on it from that Oscar.
Yes.
Yeah, right. And so it's the same reason why like Ke Huy Quan is getting a film that comes out in 2025 where he's the lead is because he won an Oscar, and so there's people who kind of want to be on his train. My hope is always like, hey, remember the guy from Captain Phillips, the Ethiopian guy who won an Oscar?
Yeah.
He's starring in movies now. No, we see him pop. He was in The Curse, right, with
Yeah.
Nathan Fielder, but like he didn't get a lot of gigs.
I think it's just like he doesn't have one of those faces, and it's just also
When
it's not as if like Michelle Yeoh would have like
if they cast her in a Marvel movie,
which
that
she
would make.
has done,
Was
and
she
she
has? Was
has
she
been
in
acting.
Shang-Chi?
I maybe I we have to double check.
I
Like
don't,
I wouldn't be
that was a movie I
surprised.
watched and it like in one ear and out the other. I don't remember her being in a Marvel movie. I just remember because like uh Everywhere All at Once was kind of like her big thing. I know she's going to be in a Star Trek show,
Yeah.
which is about their like covert ops organ, which is weird for Star Trek. That doesn't feel very Star Trekky. But anyway, uh yeah, this just didn't feel like a good fit for her.
No.
Now, someone this did feel like a good fit for, Jeff Goldblum.
Yes.
Tell me what you thought of his performance.
Uh, Singing is short, but you know what? He has such a good voice.
Mhm.
And he's one of those voices that if he goes right to talking, right to singing, I'm perfectly fine with it. It's just like that bass of his voice. He already has a rhythm, and he had the perfect charisma when it came to playing essentially like a COVID villain.
Well, he's a snake oil salesman.
Yeah.
Like that's what he was doing back in the real world, I
Yeah.
assume. And that's the way the wizard has kind of been portrayed in some instances as like a con man. And that fits. That's a very American thing, right?
Yeah.
That's the guy who's promising you the thing that's going to cure you.
Yeah, the president of the United States.
Yeah. Uh, and I think one of the things I really love about Goldblum, and I realized watching this, is I believe him in everything he's ever played. And there's a film that he was in that came out in 2018 called The Mountain. He co-starred with Ty Sheridan. It's a Rick Alverson movie, who's a very, I would say, abrasive director. He doesn't make movies that are pleasant.
Yeah.
And in this film, Goldblum plays a doctor who specializes in performing the lobotomy procedure. It's set in the 1950s, I believe. And is responsible for Sheridan's character's mother getting a lobotomy, who I believe commits suicide before the movie starts. And he takes Sheridan under his wing as his protege. It is Jeff Goldblum, unlike you've seen him in many things. There's not lots of laughs. There's not lots of smiles. It's a very quiet, controlled, menacing at times performance.
Yeah.
And I believed every second of that. And I think about The Fly. There's another Jeff Goldblum performance. I believe that he's that guy.
Yeah.
And in here, as the Wizard of Oz, I believe he's the Wizard of Oz. He feels like he belongs in this world, that he is this character, that nothing he's saying feels like he's reading it off the page. Now, you pair that with someone like Cynthia Erivo in this instance, who I felt like there was a real Broadway acty vibe.
That's why I said it felt like she
Yeah.
was like, because I've seen her in other stuff. It just felt
Yeah,
like
it felt
Disney
odd.
sprinkled
Yeah.
on her.
And that was the same thing with like Ethan Slater, who plays Bach.
Yeah.
And even like Ariana Grande can get away with it because that's kind of the Glinda character.
Yeah.
But I felt she did a better job of pivoting to the more serious stuff just through her reactions when shit hits the fan.
Yes.
And she's kind of quietly, moving back into the shadows, realizing, oh, everything's fucked. Overall, would you recommend Wicked to our audience in general? Let's say they're not a fan of the musical. They don't really care about the musical.
If you're not a fan of the musical, don't watch it. It just feels like it's kind of a waste. The summary is Alphaba goes to school by accident because her sister's there, and she unleashes some magic, and a teacher goes, haha, it was me all along. So she can go have private lessons, and then her sister is like a sister that she's basically been taking care of all her life.
You don't need to
like,
get into all the details in this
like,
movie. There's a lot of subplots.
whatever. And then like and then Glinda and her hate each other, become friends, and then Glinda's like, "No, you're gonna ruin all your chances if you go against the wizard."
Because there's like some changes from the book. Like in the book, Nessa Rose is born without arms,
Yeah,
and changing her to someone that relies on a wheelchair for mobility, that's a change I'm fine with. Because I don't think it doesn't undermine the core conceit of that story.
yeah,
She's still a disabled person, and her sisters wants to help her
yeah,
eventually. Uh, but yeah, I'd say if you're a fan of Wicked, you've seen the movie already, right?
yeah.
If you're not a fan of Wicked, it's 2 hours and 40 minutes.
It's 2 hours and 40
So just
minutes.
decide and then realize if you feel compelled to be a completionist, you're probably going to have to watch a possibly longer second part.
Yeah, and the thing is, like, I'll be honest, at the least the 2 hours and 40 minutes does go by quickly.
With musicals, I usually find time goes by pretty quick because the songs help.
It's not like it's not like for me, chapter 2 where I was really fucking mad when I left that
You were thinking
film.
about how you could be mopping our floor at home instead of
Yeah,
watching it.
I mean, I genuinely still feel that way.
Yeah.
This passes quickly, so you don't feel that angry, and now it's like on video on demand or
Yeah, but for me, it's
whatever.
like I don't know. It felt like it completely missed the point of the novel. And this is more a critique of just the musical it's based on. That I was just never really going to be that invested in it.
It feels like a watch that you would do if you just want to know what the fuck everyone is talking about.
On the last night of 1999, two high school juniors crash a New Year's Eve party, only to find themselves fighting for their lives when the terror of Y2K becomes a reality, and all machines rise up against humanity. This is Y2K, the latest film from writer, comedian, director Kyle Mooney. So we have kept up with Kyle Mooney's work a bit. I did not watch his entire tenure on SNL, but I remember when I would see him on SNL, I wouldn't say everything he made I liked, but there were things he made that I thought were very clever and funny.
Mm-hmm.
While he was on SNL, he did make a movie, a feature film, Brigsby Bear. What do you remember about Brigsby Bear? Did you like it? How do you feel about it?
I liked it. Wasn't it about like a kid that basically had grown up in a survivor, like in a bunker situation?
And was it Mark Hamill was his father?
Yes, and
Yeah,
that like
they had fed him like some TV show called Brigsby Bear that taught him this whole weird like alternate version of what was going on outside of the
yes, because it
bunker
turned
they
out
were
like
in.
his father was making the recordings the whole time.
Yeah. And so it was essentially a fish out of water movie about Kyle Mooney's character being introduced to what the outside world was actually like
Yeah.
and seeing if he could make it there.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was a pretty well done kind of comedy with pathos. It did a good job. Where I really enjoyed Mooney's work was his Netflix miniseries, Saturday Morning All-Star Hits.
Yes.
That was where I thought the way he plays with the medium was very interesting to me. That series is designed to, if you could tell from the title, emulate the tone of these sort of Saturday morning children's block of programming.
Yes.
And he played a pair of identical twin blonde surfer dude co-hosts.
Yes.
And there was there were things happening between them. And then I think it was near the end, there was a whole episode that wasn't Saturday Morning All-Star Hits. It was like a news report interrupting
Yes.
it. And there was all of this like backstory, and it had like horror elements to it.
Yeah, it did.
And the cartoons that they featured took on increasingly more adult themes and became much more inappropriate for children to watch.
I mean, it also was a reflection on the many like movies that were turned into cartoons that were inappropriate for children at the end of the day.
And so, yeah, I just thought that was a really interesting way of telling a story. Like he used a framework that you wouldn't expect.
Yes.
Well, Y2K is a much more straightforward type of film. And what's odd to me is that this is an A24 movie.
Yeah.
And when we think about that distributor, that studio, I wrote down all of the movies produced by A24 in 2024 because they also distributed a few things, but some of them were like comedy specials or documentaries. And I'm not going to, so that tells you that there's even more than what I'm going to list. So I'm just
Yes.
listing what A24 like slapped it on as this is an official A24 product.
Okay, go for it.
Uh, Problemista,
All right.
Love Lies Bleeding, Civil War, I Saw the TV Glow,
Okay.
Tuesday. That was the Julia Louis-Dreyfus movie.
Okay,
Seemed a little too sappy for me. Janet Planet, Maxine, The Front Room, A Different Man, We Live in Time, Heretic, Queer, Y2K, The Brutalist, and Baby Girl. Because right now they have, I think, 4 movies in the theater right now. Queer, Y2K, The Brutalist, and Baby Girl all at the same
Yeah,
time.
I mean, here's the thing. There are movies in there that fit the criteria of what we come to expect from A24, and others that just feel like I would not be surprised if they're just like, we're gonna set up a streaming service that will die within a year or two.
Well,
Let's be honest.
I think you can I think you can stream their movies on their website, maybe. I don't know. Or Max is kind of the official A24 like hub.
Yeah.
I would say that, or actually, there's something I read back in 2023, I think. And it was A24, people from the studio talking about they were going to pivot to try to go broader,
Yes.
to make more movies for a larger audience than they had been making. And I think when you look at that list, you can tell they're still trying to adhere to a certain sort of aesthetic and style.
It's like, hey, let's introduce you to directors that you haven't heard of or new type of talent, while also just being like, let's hit the teen market. Let's
It's
hit
very
the
millennial and Zoomer.
yes.
When you compare it to something like a Warner Discovery or a Universal, who are still kind of just they're going with whatever's trending,
Yeah.
and A24 is kind of setting trends. You think about everything everywhere all at once, where it was, oh, it's a comedy, it's a family comedy, but it's high concept. That has certainly become a thing, I feel like, in movies, where we don't just have, like this movie, for instance, Y2K. We could have had a movie, like a coming of age movie set on, December 31st, 1999, and it was just kind of about these characters realizing that this new millennium was ahead of them. You could even made it bittersweet, right? You have them talking about things that we know in retrospect aren't going to come to pass, or 9/11 is going to get in the way, or COVID's going to get in the way.
It's also very like Maximus when it comes to like ideas now and also visual stuff. I think
Yeah, I think you're right. Maximalism has
yes.
definitely won the fight.
Yes, which the thing is like I don't have a problem with, but due to the budget that this film had, I don't think it was able to go as far as needed for it to be that visually.
But then at the same time, I think it's trying to pass the DIY-ness of it as a kind of charm.
Yes.
And I guess it kind of works.
I think there are points in this movie that I enjoyed, but there is a point that I just was kind of like I just started to tune out.
I checked out, yeah. Well, because it's when it gets into the whole like sci-fi horror angle, that's where I felt it lost some of the things that worked at the beginning. Because then it becomes a genre picture that it's going to hit these certain tropes, and it becomes sort of it's giggling at its own like silly gore and things like
Well,
that.
the moment that they absolutely lost me is
A character dies.
no.
No? Oh, that did feel very Zombieland to me.
Yes.
That felt like something.
And I haven't even seen Zombieland.
You haven't
It's
seen
just
that? Oh,
like
when Bill Murray shows up in Zombieland.
yeah, but I know that he shows up because the commercials fucking like spoil it.
And so yeah, it was. Yeah, I agree with that. I kind of felt like I didn't really know what kind of movie we were watching now. Like the comedy, I didn't know how heightened the world was versus how grounded things were supposed to be.
I think it also just shows that Kyle Mooney does his best work when it's in shorter formats.
And he did come up doing like web shorts and things like that. Yeah, so that makes sense. It's sort of, and when I go back to something like Brigsby Bear, he can do very like human-centered stories that are still funny and have his style.
Mm-hmm.
This felt like A24 wanted some sort of end of the year comedy that would appeal to young people but also be nostalgic for older people.
Yeah, it wanted their own version of Booksmart, their own version
Super bad.
of like Super Bad. But there was like this missing element, which I think the element that was missing were the adults that the younger crowd want to be cool towards, or vice versa. The cops in like
Super bad.
Super Bad, when they end up with like, I forgot the name of the kid,
McLovin.
McLovin, and how they form a bond. And like
Yeah, there
in
were no side. It was yeah, there really were no side
And the
stories.
thing
Everything
is,
was
like,
very much the
and
main plot.
Booksmart is like them hopping through all these places, but then also having like that awkward moment where their principal is Ubering them from one place to the other. And then you have like, I think Jessica Williams ends up hooking up with one of the students who's already 18, and that
Well,
she,
wasn't that the guy Eduardo Franco who's
yeah,
in this
yeah,
movie as Farkas? Yeah.
yeah.
Which this movie had those kind of characters. Like it had this Eduardo Franco guy as Farkas. Uh, there was someone else who appeared and I thought was going to have a bigger role. I can't think of him at the moment. But then it had like Tim Heidecker and Alicia Silverstone play the main character's parents.
Yeah.
I think they did fine.
Yeah, and like
But they are very similar. Do you think about was it Lisa Kudrow and I can see as Will Forte and Booksmart, weren't they her
they
parents?
were
They
like,
were funnier.
they were funnier, where it was getting to the point that just like it was one of them like like just talking about sex and them immediately trying to retrieve away.
With these parents, I never really got a vibe of like, what's their deal?
No, like we were supposed to get that embarrassing moment when Tim Heidecker is like, "Oh, have you ever French kissed? Your mom taught me how to French kiss, and it was wet." And
Well,
it's
it
just
also
like,
reminds me of Easy A with Stanley Tucci and Patricia Clarkson.
but they were so
But and
funny.
that's the thing is, it reminded me of them, but not in the best possible way. Where I was going, "Oh, I've seen this trope pulled off far better in other movies."
Yeah, they had like very minimal time, and it's supposed to be like these two kids, junior, like they like bring into the, and like what I did like was Danny.
You let's go over that summary. You kind of mumbled through some things
Okay,
there.
okay, okay.
So we have Eli and Danny,
Yeah.
Jaden Martell, and Julian Dennison. Jaden Martell, he's not the kid from It.
Yes, he
He
is.
is? Okay, that's what I thought. And then Julian Dennison is from The Hunt for the Wilder People.
Yes.
They are nerdy. They make custom action figures for that 70s show,
Yes.
which I like that detail, but it doesn't really pan out in any funny
No,
way.
it doesn't pan out. They don't even get bullied for it.
Yeah.
Which I thought they would.
So they are going to this New Year's Eve party. They found a condom in a copy of a book at the library that was being used as a bookmark. I forget which book it was.
Okay, I did not
That
like
was the
pick up
joke.
on
And so
that.
they keep passing it between each other in the hopes that one of them will use it someday. And so I thought that was a funny detail. It's all the stuff at the beginning where they're human and the scenario is relatable is the best part of the movie. And it's when the new millennium hits and then it becomes this like gory horror movie. That was where I felt disconnected.
So
And I knew going in that's what was going to happen.
yeah,
too.
and the thing is, like, there are certain deaths in the thing that like make it seem really cool, but then that absence is felt through the storyline afterwards. I did like the fact that like before the whole chaos happens, um Danny, played by Julian Dennison, is way cooler, and also like um embarrasses his friend without meaning to, about him just like, but also we don't get that after seeing him be so cool. You're kind of like, all right, can someone explain the beef between him and Farkas? Because it's sort of like Farkas like gets him so down before they end up going to this party that you're like, okay, how can this guy have as much confidence?
And we compared to something like Booksmart or Superbad, they did a very good job of using limited exposition to fill us in on the backstories of these characters and how they were related to each other,
Well,
whether they were enemies, they were friends, and why.
and then also just being like telling the audience or even telling the characters like, you have me in like a stereotype which I don't belong in. And that really doesn't happen even when the Y2K stuff happens. It's only mentioned briefly, but it felt really quickly brushed upon.
The cinematographer of this movie is responsible for a movie that is known for its cinematography.
Okay.
It's a whole trilogy that is probably one of the most popular trilogies, or was in the early 2000s. This is the same guy who shot The Matrix, shot
Oh.
Y2K. And I think it does look better than I expected it was going to look. But then there are those rough moments. But at the same time, I wonder sometimes if those rough moments aren't intentional because they don't want it to look too nice.
Yeah.
And so that, yeah, that has me wondering. There's never really an explanation as to why this happens other than just
No.
Y2K, right? And I guess from the perspective of the characters, they're not going to know.
But it's also very confusing because towards the end, then Rachel's character solves the whole problem.
Well, let's talk about Rachel Ziegler because they're clearly using her to promote the movie. All of almost every photo you can find online, posters, things like that, it's her.
Yeah.
Whenever they were on Tim Heidecker's podcast to promote it, because he plays Eli's dad, Kyle Mooney was on, and then they had Rachel Zegler on via Zoom.
Yeah.
So and when you look at the cast, she is the biggest name at the moment in the cast. She was in West Side Story. She's about to be in that Snow White horrible Disney movie,
Yeah.
but it's gonna make a ton of money.
I
And
think
so,
she was also like in a prequel for the Hunger Games. That was like a Netflix
oh
thing.
yeah, I know what you're talking about. She was in that last horrible Shazam movie. Uh, but yeah, she of all the actors here, she's the one whose name you're going to sell the movie the most with. What did you think of her?
I think she was okay. There's nothing. The thing is, like, I haven't seen enough of her to be like, she's a good actress.
I feel like her thing was singing.
Yeah, and like, thankfully, they don't force that upon us in this.
So like maybe she's a great singer, but yeah, I would agree with you. She is. I can go. Well, she's a pretty young woman, but her acting is. I mean, I feel like there's hundreds of other actresses you could swap in for what she
Yeah,
gives in Y2K. It's nothing
I think it's
spectacular.
just like at the beginning, what I liked about it is that like half of the film felt like a rom-com from the early 2000s. Like it was hitting all those marks.
And he knows the tropes of that era really
Yes.
well.
And I think what happens, even though it's a unique setting, which I wish I would have enjoyed more, it just, you start to question, like, okay, so what can attack you in a Y2K scenario, what can't attack you, because I feel like there should have been like that one person that is really into old cars for them to be able to get from point A to point B.
Or just there were no clear rules established for what was
No.
going on.
And like it immediately, like within a day, they're already like in a Mad Max scenario with certain people. Like it felt like it was just like,
But then that's the same time it's you need to establish rules and you also need to set a consistent comedic tone. Because there's moments where this feels incredibly farcical, and then
yeah.
there's moments where it feels very grounded.
Yeah,
And it's a kind of tonal whiplash.
I think it's also just being like, um, I wish that they would have talked about the Y2K panic a
Yeah.
little bit or been shown on the TV or had one of the parents being obsessed with it. Like maybe like having Danny's like because it shows like his a mom like we only see his mom, but like him talking like, oh yeah, my dad just like it keeps telling me I can't leave the house. That the whole thing that they have to sneak out of the house because
He
his
thinks
dad is
shit's gonna
trying,
go
like
wrong.
shit's gonna go down, kind of thing. To explain it, because what this felt more like, not that you're trying to get Gen Z to see
That is
this.
true. It's if you don't know what Y2K is, you're gonna be very confused by this.
So it felt more as if a premise for millennials to come in, have a nostalgic moment, and go like, "Huh, that's interesting twist," versus explain Y2K. So that way, when we get into it, you'll have people even arguing as to how they didn't expect that or why that doesn't work. Because it's just like that would be an amusing piece of just being like because like the only one funny thing is like the first victim of the Y2K stuff, they all yell, "Oh, look, it's Y2K." And
Yeah, I feel like because they do cut to the news a few times, right?
yeah,
And I feel like there was your perfect medium, and I think they kind of give like the most brief explanation, but it's still not enough if you're not familiar. Uh, yeah, it felt like I didn't know who the audience really was for this movie,
yeah,
other than A24 wanted to have a wide release picture for the holidays that had some nostalgia-y bits, and so they were like, "Hey, the early 2000s is popular. Let's do this movie then."
and also like you could have had a moment of building up tension, right? So the build up tension is them escaping while we're watching one of the machines build itself up. Because
Or
like we see the machines and they're just basically like machines with monitors as faces, arms and legs. They're like walking
yeah,
around. You need to show me being built so it could just be like, oh no, oh
well, I think
shit.
that's also budgetary
Yeah.
restrictions. Or I felt like maybe some sort of there wasn't a lot of foreshadowing or build up. Right, the tension needed to happen before everything hit the fan.
Yeah.
And so there were no hints that like, something's wrong.
Yeah.
It just happens.
Yeah, and like there's a lot of loopholes because for example, Laura played by Rachel Zegler, she one of her good friends is like a rave kid that like watches someone die because of a bed.
Yeah, they're on a like posturepedic bed. Yeah.
Yes. And like how like at no point like there are a few people that it's like, oh no, she's done too much drugs. They don't let that character like be in the movie long enough for them to be like, hey, really, are you sure you didn't see anything or did you do something because you had like some acid flashback kind of shit?
Here's where I think the film reflects some modern or contemporary pacing
Yeah.
issues. Take The Thing, similar premise, right?
Yeah.
There are these, there'll be an attack by the creature, and then we're allowed to have these sort of long periods of just people talking.
Hmm.
They're talking about what happened, they're doing things in reaction to what happened. In this movie, whenever things start, it feels like an amusement park ride or you're going through like a haunted house attraction because it's just nonstop. Eventually, we do finally reach a place where there's a lull, but I've noticed this in modern films. They don't they want there to just be this like constant upping of stakes and this like momentum and pace that's way too fast.
Yeah.
And it doesn't allow me as an audience member to really take in what's happening. And what it does is it undercuts the deaths and the violence, and they're only able to be taken in as like a piece of comedy rather than like someone died. There's like one death in the house at the house party
Hmm.
that has any sort of pathos attached to it. Everyone else dies, and I got the vibe I was supposed to be laughing, and it's just really weird. It's a
Yeah.
really weird because like they're children as well, so that's why I'm like, I don't know. I just don't think it's that funny to watch like a 15-year-old kid get their like head cut off. That's not that
No.
funny. And especially like you're doing it in a movie that's already very tonally all over the place, so I'm not really sure what I'm supposed to feel about this. Does this make us want to write off Kyle Mooney, or are we still interested in what he will do next?
No, it doesn't make me want to cut him off. I kind of just wish that he would have.
I'd say cut him off. You know?
There's there's this film that it's like it's a low budget film that we watched that we were just like the girl was the best thing about that movie. It's about like she gives him like he's an alien. She's like a nasty little bitch that gives him these magazines.
Who's the he in
The
this?
alien. Let me finish. And he's
Okay.
like, I have no interest in
Oh,
you
you're talking about
boys.
Psycho Gorman.
Yeah, I wish he would.
That,
I wish
yeah.
he watched
Yeah,
something like
yeah.
that and then understood like
That is a tonally consistent movie that does what Y2K was going for,
yes,
but nails it. It is gory as fuck, but it always reminds you that it's funny. It's
yes,
going, this is comedy. This is like really gross, over the top comedy.
yeah,
And we don't get a lot of that here. Like I said, he's trying to be grounded and make you feel bad in some moments, and then in other moments, you're supposed to be laughing at people getting their heads cut off.
yeah.
Very strange. Would you recommend this movie to our audience of listeners out there?
I mean, you got a few hours to kill.
Well, not even that. I mean,
Yeah,
it's like what, hour and a half?
yeah, it's
Uh, yeah, it's hour 31, so it
mm,
kind of it doesn't overstay its welcome. I wouldn't recommend it. I think it's missing the things that would make it a really memorable movie. If you watch it, it's probably going to be a movie you have no interest in ever watching again. Like I
yeah.
can't imagine ever sitting down and watching it again. Well, we hope you enjoyed this first episode of season 5 for the Pop Cult Podcast. And check our show notes for any important links, including to our website, popcult.blog. Make sure that you're subscribed to be notified when new episodes are up, wherever it is you regularly listen to your podcasts. If you visit popcult.blog for more reviews, you're going to find that we've kicked off 2025 with a film series I'm calling Hazy Shades of Winter. These are all movies set in that season, and they all evoke the feel of it. Very wintry, very cold. I've already posted reviews for Ang Lee's The Ice Storm and the incredible anti-war Soviet film The Ascent. Coming up next week will be reviews for Akira Kurosawa's Ikiru, Takashi Kitano's Fireworks, Ingmar Bergman's Winter Light, and Eric Raymer's My Night at Maud's. If you enjoy what we do here on the podcast and over at popcult.blog, then we encourage you to support us on Patreon. We have different reward levels for you to pick from, everything from $5 up to prestigious $20. If you donate at those higher levels, like our current patron Matt, you're going to get access to picking a movie every month for us to watch and review, and you can even include your own thoughts in that. No matter what tier you choose, you will get access to Patreon exclusive podcasts. We've done a couple mini series. We've got another one coming up. Should be ready sometime around March, I'm thinking, where we're going to go through the films of Ryosuke Hamaguchi, who directed Drive My Car and Evil Does Not Exist, both of which were some of my favorite films of their respective years. And so we're really interested to dive into his work and do a little mini series spotlighting him. On our next episode of the Pop Cult Podcast, we will be reviewing Jude Law and Nicholas Hoult in The Order, as well as Jesse Eisenberg and Kieran Culkin in A Real Pain. Well, until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching.